The first shot went wide. He heard it the way you hear things at close range in an open lot, not as a sound so much as a change in the air, a pressure, something that arrived before the noise caught up with it. He was at his trunk, both hands on a paper bag, and the sound hit him, and he did not think. His body thought for him. It turned him toward the child. She was 6 cars down. 8 years old, pink sneakers, standing between 2 parked trucks, looking at her phone, waiting for someone who was inside. She had not heard the first shot the way he had heard it. She was still looking down when he moved. He was 79 years old, and his left knee had been wrong since 2003, and he covered the distance in 4 seconds, and went down over her the way he had once gone down over a package to keep it from the rain, automatically, without deliberating, because the body knows before the mind what is worth covering. The second shot came while he was going down. He felt it in the left shoulder before he understood what it was. The feeling was less than he expected, a pressure, a burn, the specific sensation of something that had gone in and was deciding whether to stay. He pressed the child into the asphalt between the 2 trucks and covered the back of her head with his hand and held it there and did not move. He did not know whose child she was. He did not stop to find out. What happened in the hour that followed and in the days after it was the kind of thing that does not happen in Lula, Mississippi, or anywhere else for that matter, except when a man does something without thinking and the world responds in kind. The Delta heat arrived in Lula in late May and did not negotiate for terms. By June it was settled in, the kind of heat that sat on the fields and the roads and the parking lots and the tin roofs and the storefronts with a permanence that made the shade feel like a rumor. Highway 49 ran through the center of Lula at the specific angle of a road that has been there long enough to stop asking permission. And at the corner of 49 and Chestnut, the Dollar General occupied the building that had been a hardware store until 2014 and a farm supply before that, and still had the high ceiling and the wide door of a place built for bulk goods. On Saturday afternoons, it was the busiest block in town. The Dollar General, the gas station across the road, the pawn shop 2 doors down, the cluster of cars that collected there the way cars collect in small towns on Saturdays, which is everywhere at once, without quite filling anything. The parking lot held 22 spaces and had 4 empty ones at 2:45 on the Saturday afternoon in June, when the argument between Marcus Teal and his cousin Duran moved from the third aisle of the Dollar General to the parking lot in the specific way that arguments between those 2 men had been moving from indoor spaces to outdoor spaces for 7 years, because Marcus Teal had a temper that could not hold a ceiling and a cousin who knew exactly which words removed the ceiling. They had been at it since noon. By 2:45 they were outside. No one in the parking lot planned for what came next. No one had the frame for it. The fight happened, and then the shots happened. And the 2 men who had been fighting were already running, and the parking lot was chaos. And then it was the sound of the shots fading, and the smell of it, and the silence that follows violence in a small town, which is a silence that takes a few seconds to arrive, because it takes a few seconds for everyone to understand that the loud thing has stopped. Cabell Rower came out of the Dollar General running before the second shot finished. He was 47 years old, 6'4", 260 pounds, and he moved through the Dollar General's door with the urgency of a man who had heard the first shot from inside and had known the way a man knows things that are about to involve his child, exactly what the knowing required of him. He had the motor oil in one hand, and he dropped it without noticing and pushed through the door and scanned the lot. He had been the president of the Clarksdale chapter of the Hells Angels for 9 years. He had the patches on his back and the build of a man who had never in his adult life been uncertain about whether he could handle what was in front of him. He had seen things in 9 years of chapter business that most people would not recover from seeing. And he had not recovered from all of them in the ways that show. And there were places in him that only Marisol could reach, and she could reach all of them. He scanned the lot. People on the ground. People behind cars. The 2 men who had been fighting gone. The smell of it still in the air. He found her in 3 seconds. Between 2 trucks, 6 spaces down. A man he had never seen before. Old and large and gray, flat on the ground over her with one hand on the back of her head and the other arm braced against the truck beside them, and his face turned sideways against the asphalt with his eyes open, checking the lot the way soldiers check for what is still coming. Cabell crossed the 6 spaces at a run. He was alone. He had been alone since his wife, Renata, took the car 2 years ago and drove to her mother's in Jackson and had not come back. And the terms of that departure were still being worked out by 2 lawyers in Clarksdale who charged by the hour and had not finished. He had Marisol every other weekend, and this had been his weekend, and she had been standing in the parking lot for 45 seconds while he bought motor oil, and she had been 8 years old, and she had been standing between 2 trucks with her phone when the shots came, and the man on the ground had gotten there before he had. He crouched beside them. He put his hand on Marisol's back. "Marisol," he said. "Daddy," her voice was into the asphalt. Controlled, the way her voice always got when she was working hard to keep it that way, which was something she had gotten from him. "There's a man." "I see him," Cabell said. He looked at the man. The man looked back at him. 79 years old at least, with the build of someone who had been large in a different way in a different decade and had kept the framework of it. His left shoulder was wrong. The shirt there was dark, and the wrongness of the position of the arm told Cabell what he needed to know about what the second shot had found. "She all right?" the man asked. He was looking at Marisol. "She's all right," Cabell said. The man exhaled once. He did not move his hand from Marisol's head until Cabell's hand was there to replace it. If you're new here, subscribe before we go any further, and drop your city and state in the comments. I want to know how far this story gets. I read every one. Now, back to that parking lot in Lula on a Saturday afternoon in June, because there are 2 people in this story who deserve to be known before the next part begins, and one of them is an 8-year-old girl named Marisol Roark, and one of them is the man who covered her, and you need to know him the way he deserves to be known before you see what came after. Earl Joseph Briggs was 79 years old and had spent 31 years delivering mail on 12 rural routes out of the Lula post office, which meant he had driven the levee roads and the gravel county roads and the double-track farm paths of Coahoma County in every weather that Mississippi produced, and had put the mail in the boxes and moved on in. Had done this until 2012 when his retirement came and he had taken it because his back said it was time, and because Vivian said it was time, and because 31 years is a complete thing and you can set it down. He had known every family on those routes, not in the way of a census, in the way of a man who is present at a door 6 days a week for 3 decades, who knows that the Andersons get the magazines on Tuesday, and that the Tillman box is always damp inside no matter what you do, and that the family at the end of the Millwood Road puts out lemonade in the summer for the mail carrier, which had been Earl for 24 of those years, and which he had never once declined, because you did not decline lemonade from someone who made it for you. He knew the people of Coahoma County the way you know country that you have passed through slowly and paid attention to. He had been married to Vivian Gale Briggs for 52 years, which was a marriage that had the specific quality of something that had been made well, and it held, not without stress, and not without the 2 of them working at it in the ways that marriages require, but held in the way of a thing that 2 people intended. Vivian died in February of 2019, pancreatic cancer. 7 weeks from diagnosis to the end, which was the kind of timeline that does not allow for the adjustments people tell themselves they will make when there is time. There was not time. Earl had held her hand at the hospital in Clarksdale, and she had told him to eat properly, and he had told her he would, and neither of them had said everything they had left to say, because everything they had left to say was too large to fit in 7 weeks, and they both knew it, and had made their peace with the knowing. He had 3 children, 2 daughters in Memphis and a son in Atlanta, and 7 grandchildren, and he saw them at the intervals that adult children and their parents see each other, which is less than intended and more than nothing, and which he understood as the shape of a life rather than a failing of one. He kept the notepad in his shirt pocket, the 3x5 Meade spiral-bound kind, the same he had used on his postal route for 31 years to note package slips and forwarding addresses and the things that needed remembering. After he retired, he had kept using them for a different purpose, which was writing down what he saw. A hawk on a fence post on the Levee Road, the specific color of the soybean fields in August, when they turn from green to the particular yellow-green that means they are finished. The sound the Dollar General parking lot makes on a Saturday afternoon, which is a specific sound of engines and carts and children, and the radio from someone's open window. He had been writing these things down since 1986 and had filled 43 notebooks and kept them on a shelf in the spare bedroom without rereading them, because writing it was the point, not the reading of it. He wrote down what he saw because he had understood, somewhere in the middle of his postal route years, that paying attention to things was a form of respect for them, and that writing them down was how you made the respect permanent. He had been in the parking lot of the Dollar General at 2:45 on a Saturday in June, because Saturday was grocery day, had been since Vivian died. He still bought the sweet tea she liked, Brisk, the gallon jug, because that was the one. Even though he was the only one drinking it, he was at his trunk with a paper bag when the first shot changed the air. He was not a man who deliberated. He had not deliberated in 31 years of rural routes when a dog came off a porch. He had not deliberated at 62 when his daughter called from Memphis at 2 a.m, and he was in his car before she finished the sentence. He was not built for deliberation in certain situations, and he knew this about himself and had made his peace with it decades ago. He saw the child between the trucks. He moved. He did not know that her father was inside buying motor oil. He did not know who her father was. He saw a child between 2 trucks who had not heard what was happening and who needed covering, and he was the only person between her and the open lot, and so he covered her. That was all of it. That was the whole reason. He was what the world makes, in certain places and certain families, when it makes something right. A man who was not capable of not acting, in the same way that water is not capable of not running downhill. Not because he was fearless. Because the alternative, the version of himself who stood behind his car and waited, was not a version of himself he could inhabit. He covered the child, and he held on, and he absorbed the ricochet in the left shoulder, and he kept his hand on the back of her head until the man whose child she was came across the parking lot and replaced it. The ambulance came in 6 minutes. The Coahoma County Sheriff's vehicles came in 9. The lot filled with the machinery that fills a lot after violence, the tape, the questions, the radios, the clipboard. The specific bureaucratic calm of people whose job is to arrive after. Cabell Roark sat in the back of the ambulance beside the gurney while the paramedic worked on Earl's shoulder, and Marisol sat beside Cabell with her hand in his and her chin up. The way she held her chin when she had already processed something and was now past it, which was a thing she had been able to do since she was 4, and which Cabell considered one of the great mysteries of fatherhood. The paramedics said the fragment had to come out, and the surgery was straightforward, and Earl was going to be fine. Earl said he knew he was going to be fine. He said it without complaint or performance, just as a statement of fact, because he had decided this, and it was his to decide. At the hospital, while Earl was being prepped, Cabell sat in the waiting room outside the surgical wing. He sat with his back to the wall and his hands on his knees, and he did not speak for a long time. Marisol sat beside him. She was looking at her phone again. "He didn't know who you were," Cabell said. "Not to anyone in particular." Thinking it out. "He didn't look like he cared," Marisol said. Cabell looked at her. "No," he said. He didn't. He reached into his coat pocket and took out his phone. He sent a text to his vice president, a man named Dre Polk, that said 3 things: the hospital name, the room number, and the reason. He sent it and put the phone back in his pocket and sat with his hands on his knees and waited. The waiting room at the Coahoma County Regional Medical Center had a television mounted high on the east wall, a row of chairs along the window with the padding worn flat, a coffee machine that had been technically operational since 2018, and a candy machine beside it that had not. There were 4 other people in the room. A young woman with a sleeping toddler across her lap, a man in work clothes with his head back and his eyes closed, a teenage boy who was doing homework, and an older woman in a church hat who was reading a Bible in the particular attentive way that people read the Bible when they need it to say something specific. At 4:30, the door to the waiting room opened and a man came in who was not any of those things. He was 38, trim, in a machine shop t-shirt with the name of the shop in Tunica on the chest, and he moved through the door with the bearing of a man who knew where he was going and had already decided what he was going to say when he got there. He did not look at Cabell. He did not look at anyone. He went to the nurse's station and asked a question and was told something, and walked toward the curtained area where Earl was being held pre-surgery. He stopped at the curtain. He waited until Earl saw him through the gap. Then he raised his phone. The screen faced Earl. A photograph on it, Earl's house, taken from the street, close enough that the number on the mailbox was visible. The same mailbox Earl had painted white in 2017, and which was the first thing Vivian had ever seen of the house that would become their house, standing on the sidewalk with a real estate flyer in her hand in 1971. He held the phone there for 5 seconds, long enough for Earl to understand. Then he lowered it. He had not said a word. He did not need to. He was a man who had watched his brother be protected by silence for 20 years, and he had arrived at the hospital because the old man was a witness, and witnesses who understood the available implications were easier to manage than witnesses who did not. He turned around. Cabell Roark was standing 6 feet behind him. The waiting room went so quiet that the only sound was the Bible pages turning in the hands of the woman in the church hat. And then, those stopped too. Cabell had seen all of it. He had seen the man go to the curtain, and he had seen the phone raised, and he had read the photograph from where he sat, and he had not moved until the man lowered the phone and turned, because he had wanted him to have finished what he came to do before the conversation they were about to have began. He was looking at Wayne Collier with the expression he used when he was not going to explain himself. "You want to show me that phone," Cabell said. Wayne Collier looked at him, at the cut, at the patches, at the size of the man between him and the door. "Private business," Collier said. "That man in there covered my daughter from your brother's gun," Cabell said. "So no." The room was silent. The teenage boy had stopped writing. The young woman with the toddler had gone completely still. Collier's eyes moved to the door, calculated the distance. "I'd think about that," Cabell said. He said it the way he said things that did not require volume. The quietness of it was the point. Collier did not move for a moment. He looked at the cut again, at the president patch, at the specific quality of stillness in a man who was 260 pounds and was not shifting his weight or adjusting his stance or doing anything that suggested the outcome of the next 30 seconds was in question. Marcus didn't mean for. Collier started. I know what Marcus meant, Cabell said. We're going to talk to the sheriff about what Marcus meant. Together right now. Collier's jaw tightened. I don't have to. You showed a photograph to a witness, Cabell said, before the surgery. That's on the hospital camera. He paused. And mine. He raised his own phone. The screen was on. The camera had been running since Collier raised his phone at the curtain. Collier froze. And then from outside, from the parking structure across from the hospital's east entrance, from the road that ran along the building's east side, a sound began. Low. At first. The kind of low that comes from many engines at once, from a distance, arriving with the intention of arriving. It moved through the hospital's exterior walls and into the waiting room in the way that sound does when there is enough of it and nothing between it and you. Collier turned to look at the window. The parking structure's first 2 levels were filling, not with cars, with motorcycles. Headlights on in the late afternoon light, coming in from Clarksdale and from Greenville and from Greenwood, from 3 chapters who had been called by Dre Polk at 4:45 and who had been told what they needed to be told and who had come because the president's daughter had been shielded by a stranger and the stranger was inside, and that was sufficient. 61 motorcycles. Someone would count them later, and that would be the number. They filled the structure's first 2 levels, and the road alongside it, and the hospital's visitor lot, and they cut their engines one by one until the last one died. And the silence that followed was the silence of 61 men who had not been asked for an explanation, and had not needed one. Wayne Collier stood at the waiting room window and looked at the parking structure. He looked at Cabell. He looked at the phone in Cabell's hand, the camera still running. I need to make a call, Collier said. You can make it at the sheriff's office, Cabell said. Dre Polk came through the waiting room door first, road captain patch, with 2 brothers behind him, and the expression of a man who has driven fast and arrived clean. He found Cabell's eyes and crossed the room and looked once at Collier and then at Cabell, and received a nod that told him what was needed. 2 brothers walked Collier to his car. They did not touch him. They did not need to. One of them had a cell phone pointed at the parking lot camera the whole way, and Collier walked between them the way a man walks when the exit available to him is the only one, and he is taking it. The Coahoma County Sheriff received Cabell's video at 5:58 p.m. Wayne Collier was picked up at his home in Tunica at 7:15. Marcus Teal had been in custody since 4 o'clock, identified by 3 witnesses in the Dollar General parking lot who had watched the whole thing and had found, now that they were no longer alone in the space, that they were willing to say what they had seen. Dre and 2 brothers stayed in the waiting room. The others held the parking structure and the lot, not blocking anything, not preventing anything, simply present in the way that 61 men are present when they have decided that a specific piece of ground matters, and they are going to stand on it. At 7:42, the surgical team came out and told Cabell that Earl Briggs was out of surgery and the fragment was out, and he was awake and doing well and could have visitors. Cabell went in alone. He told the brothers to wait. Earl was in the bed with his left arm in a sling and an IV in his right hand and his eyes open and alert in the way of someone who had not been asleep and had no intention of being. He looked at Cabell when he came in, and he did not look surprised. Marisol? Earl asked. She's fine, Cabell said. She's with my VP's wife in the waiting room. She's been doing homework. Earl let out a breath. She's a calm child, he said. She is, Cabell said. She gets it from her mother's side. He sat in the chair beside the bed. He looked at the man in it for a moment. You didn't know who she was, he said. No, Earl said. Why'd you do it? Earl looked at the ceiling for a moment. He looked at the IV in his hand. She was right there, he said. And so was I. The room was quiet. The hospital made its sounds around them. The PA, the equipment, the muffled voices in the corridor. I'm Cabell Roark, Cabell said. I'm her father. Earl looked at him. I figured, Earl said. The men in the parking lot, Cabell said. They're my chapter. Earl nodded once. Are you going to be all right? Cabell asked. I've been shot before, Earl said. Cabell looked at him. Korea, Earl said. 1966. Different shoulder. He looked at his left arm. This one heals cleaner. Cabell sat with that for a moment. Is there someone I should call? Cabell asked. Family? My daughter in Memphis, Earl said. I already called her. She's on her way. A pause. She's going to have opinions. I imagine so, Cabell said. He stood. He put his hand on Earl's good arm, the right one. Brief, the gesture of one man acknowledging another's weight. We're going to be around, Cabell said. When you get out. Whatever you need. You don't have to do that, Earl said. I know, Cabell said. He looked at the man in the bed for one more moment. The gray hair. The good arm with the IV. The eyes that had been watching the lot for what was still coming when Cabell got there. She was right there, Cabell said. Returning it. Earl looked at him. His mouth did something that was almost a smile. She was right there, he agreed. Marcus Teal was charged with 2 counts of reckless endangerment, 1 count of unlawful discharge of a firearm, and 1 count of assault with a deadly weapon. Wayne Collier was charged with witness intimidation. The charges against both men were filed by the Coahoma County District Attorney's Office the following Monday, supported by 3 eyewitness statements, the Dollar General parking lot security footage, and the 47-second video from Cabell Roark's phone that showed a man raising a photograph to a surgical patient's face in a hospital waiting room. Earl Briggs was discharged the following morning. His daughter, a woman named Patricia, who had driven from Memphis in 2 hours and 20 minutes, and who arrived with opinions precisely as Earl had predicted, drove him home to Lula and stayed 3 days and cooked enough food to cover the following 2 weeks, and left with the understanding that she would be calling every evening at 8 o'clock. Which she did. Cabell Roark was at Earl's house on the afternoon of his discharge. He was not alone. He brought Dre and 4 brothers from the chapter who had trade skills, a plumber, an electrician, a man who did tile work, a man named Foster, who had been building things since before he could read, and who looked at the front of Earl's house and the condition of the gutters and the porch boards and the paint on the south-facing window trim and began making a list. Earl stood on his front porch with his arm in a sling and watched them arrive. You still don't have to do this, he said. No, Cabell said. He came up the porch steps and stood beside Earl and looked at the house. The house was the house of a man who had kept things up for 52 years with a partner and for 5 years alone. And the keeping up was visible, and the 5 years alone were visible too, in the ways that things begin to show when one set of hands becomes 2 fewer and the list gets longer than one person can manage. Vivian would have had opinions about all this, Earl said. What kind? She'd have fed every one of them, Earl said. She'd have been out here with sweet tea before you got off your bikes. We've got sweet tea, Foster said from the yard without looking up from his list. He had found a cooler in Dre's saddlebag. Earl looked at the cooler. He looked at Cabell. Brisk? He asked. Gallon jugs, Dre said. Earl was quiet for a moment. All right, he said. That evening, after the men had left and Patricia had gone to the grocery store, and the house was quiet in the particular way it went quiet in the summer evenings, when the Delta heat finally let go enough that a person could sit outside, Earl Briggs brought his sweet tea and his notepad to the porch, and sat in the chair that had been Vivian's before it was his, and opened the notepad to a fresh page. He wrote the date in the top right corner the way he always did. He did not write what he had done. He was not interested in what he had done. He was interested in what he had seen. He wrote the girl's face when she came up off the pavement, the way she looked at the parking lot first, checking it the way her father checked it, quick and complete. 8 years old, and already she had learned how to look at a room. The light in that parking lot at 2:47 on a June afternoon. The white kind. The kind that doesn't have any mercy in it. The kind that shows everything. The man who came across the lot. The way he moved. The way he crouched down beside her and put his hand on her back and said her name, and she said Daddy, and that was the whole of it. He stopped. He looked at what he had written. He wrote one more line. The color of the sky over the Delta tonight. Still blue at the edges where the heat is holding it. Going dark at the top. The particular moment when the day decides it's done. He closed the notepad. He put it in his shirt pocket. He sat on the porch with his sweet tea and the Delta evening coming in and the sound of the katydids starting up in the trees along the road, which was the sound Coahoma County made at this hour in June, and which he had been writing down in different notebooks for 39 years, and which he intended to keep writing down for as long as he was able. The fragment was out. The shoulder would heal. Patricia would call at 8. In the morning he would open a new page. There is a kind of courage that plans itself, and a kind of courage that simply lives in a person and comes out when the situation requires it. Without announcement, without the person doing anything except being who they have always been. Earl Briggs covered a child with his body because she was right there, and he was right there, and he was the kind of man who could not have made any other choice and still been himself. He did not know her name. He did not know her father. He had his sweet tea in the trunk and his notepad in his pocket, and he put himself between her and what was coming. And he held on until the holding was done. The world does not always notice that kind of courage. The world is busy. The world has things to look at. But sometimes, the right man is in the right parking lot at the right moment, and what he does reaches further than he can see, and comes back to him in ways he did not ask for and would not have predicted, in the form of 61 motorcycles in a hospital parking structure, and brisk sweet tea in gallon jugs, and a man named Foster, who starts making a list before he has been asked, and does not stop until the list is done. If this one found you, if you believe that the courage we carry without knowing we're carrying it is sometimes exactly what the moment requires, share it with someone who needs to hear that today. Subscribe so you never miss the next story. And drop a comment. Have you ever seen someone act without thinking, without asking for recognition? Someone who just did what needed doing? Tell me about it. Type "hold on" in the comments if this story reached you. I read every one.